Hi, I'm Madeline, and on the day of my sister's extravagant wedding, she floated down the aisle in my custom-designed prom dress, a one-of-a-kind couture piece my father had created just for me, while my mother whispered, "Let her have it. She's always had the spotlight anyway." I didn't cause a scene, I didn't break down in tears, but what they didn't realize was who my father truly was beneath his calm exterior, the legendary designer whose name was stitched into every seam of that gown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the daughter of fashion house mogul Vincent Laurent came with expectations that clung to me like delicate beadwork on silk. Our family's name was synonymous with luxury, with artistry, with the kind of craftsmanship that transforms fabric into fantasy. My father built Laurent Designs from a small atelier in Baltimore to international acclaim, and from my earliest memories, I was surrounded by the whisper of expensive fabrics and the rhythmic click of sewing machines. Unlike my sister Olivia, who commanded attention with her statuesque height and effortless charm, I preferred the quiet corners of my father's workshop, studying his hands as they sketched impossible silhouettes that would later drape perfectly across runway models' frames. While Olivia posed for photographers at galas, I stayed behind to help pin hems and select buttons. Fashion wasn't just our family business. It was the language my father and I shared when words failed us. The spring of my senior year, when prom invitations began circulating through Westlake Academy's hallways, my father called me into his studio one evening. The space smelled of cedar and coffee, his drawing table illuminated by a single lamp that cast dramatic shadows across the room. "Madeline," he said, his accent still carrying traces of his French heritage despite decades in America, "I want to design something special for you. Not just another dress, but a piece that represents who you are becoming." For the next 6 weeks, we worked side by side in stolen moments, early mornings before school, late evenings after his executive meetings. He taught me how to select the perfect shade of midnight blue silk that would complement my eyes, how to incorporate subtle architectural elements that honored my love of design, how hand-beaded constellations could tell a story across fabric. The dress became more than clothing. It was our shared masterpiece, a physical manifestation of his belief in me. When it was finally complete, hanging on a form in his private studio, I couldn't speak. The gown was breathtaking, asymmetrical shoulders that created a waterfall effect down the back, a bodice that featured hand-embroidered stars that matched the exact configuration of the night sky on my birthday, and layers of silk that moved like water. At the hem, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, my father had stitched my name and the words, "For the stars in your future." "This is not just for prom," my father said, his voice unusually soft. "This is for when you're ready to take your place in this industry. When you wear this, remember what your hands are capable of creating." Prom night arrived, and for once, I felt the weight of attention shift toward me. Even Olivia, home from her sophomore year at fashion school in Paris, seemed taken aback by the transformation. My classmates whispered as I entered the ballroom, and for the first time, I understood the power that my father's designs carried. They didn't just adorn, they embodied. In that moment, wearing the fruits of our shared labor, I felt invincible. The dress afterward was carefully preserved, wrapped in acid-free tissue, and stored in a temperature-controlled closet in my father's design vault. Not just a memento, but an heirloom that represented a pivotal moment in my relationship with my father and with my own potential. Sometimes at night, I would visit it, running my fingers along the intricate beadwork, remembering how it felt to be seen. 3 years later, life had shifted dramatically. I'd been accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design, focusing on textile innovation rather than high fashion, a path that raised my mother's perfectly penciled eyebrows, but earned my father's quiet approval. Olivia had graduated and returned home, taking an executive position at Laurent Designs that seemed to satisfy our mother's ambitions for her, if not her own. Then came the announcement: Olivia's engagement to Camden Phillips, heir to a hotel empire, with the kind of connections that made my mother's social climbing heart skip several beats. Wedding planning consumed our household with the fervor of Fashion Week preparations. Venue options, catering tastings, and floral arrangements became the only acceptable topics of dinner conversation. When I tried to discuss my upcoming thesis project, my mother would smile tightly and redirect. "That's nice, dear. But did you see the sample invitations Olivia selected?" I tried to be supportive, to remember that not everyone found meaning in the same places I did. I helped address envelopes and assembled welcome boxes for out-of-town guests. I listened to Olivia debate between DJs and live bands with the kind of intensity usually reserved for peace negotiations. I even took a semester off to help my father with the increased workload as he balanced running his company with designing Olivia's wedding gown, a gesture that went unacknowledged by everyone except my father, who squeezed my shoulder one late night and whispered, "I couldn't do this without you." What I didn't know, what none of us realized, was that Olivia's vision for her wedding day was expanding beyond what had been planned, reaching back to claim pieces of my history for herself. The revelation came on a Tuesday afternoon in April, 2 months before the wedding. I was in my father's studio, helping catalog fabric swatches for the upcoming fall collection when my phone chimed with a text from my cousin Eliza. "Just got the virtual tour link for the wedding website. The dress looks amazing. Didn't know he was designing one for you too?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Confused, I opened the link to oliviaandcamden.com, where an elegant interface showcased venue photos, registry information, and, there it was, a sneak peek section. My finger hovered over the thumbnail, hesitant, before tapping to enlarge the image. The midnight blue silk was unmistakable, though alterations had been made to transform it from a prom gown to a wedding dress. The asymmetrical neckline remained, but the skirt had been extended into a cathedral train. The constellation beadwork now sparkled white rather than silver, making the stars pop against the dark fabric. But it was undeniably my dress, the one piece my father had ever created exclusively for me. My hands trembled as I set my phone down. A strange numbness spread through my chest, making it difficult to breathe properly. I told myself there must be a mistake, a misunderstanding, perhaps a design inspiration that looked similar. But deep down I knew. The dress that held our shared language, our private history, was being repurposed without a single word to me. I found my father in his office, surrounded by sketches and fabric samples, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed production schedules. He looked up when I entered, his smile fading as he registered my expression. "Madeline? What's wrong?" I slid my phone across his desk, the image of the modified dress still displayed on the screen. "Is this what I think it is?" He removed his glasses slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. A gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was buying himself moments to think. "Your sister asked if we could use elements from your prom design. I assumed she had discussed it with you." "Elements?" My voice emerged steadier than I expected. "Dad, that's my dress. The one you made for me. The only one you've ever made just for me." His eyes, usually so perceptive when examining the drape of a garment or the tension in a seam, couldn't seem to meet mine. "It's been modified significantly. The structure is completely different. The symbolism." "The stars are still there," I interrupted. "You told me they were for my future." He sighed, and for the first time I noticed how tired he looked, how the pressure of balancing his company with family expectations had etched new lines around his eyes. "Your mother thought it would be a beautiful gesture, a way to incorporate family history into Olivia's big day." "Did anyone think to ask me?" "It's not just a dress, Dad. It was ours. It was something we made together." A soft knock interrupted us, and my mother appeared in the doorway, her smile tight and practiced. "Vincent," the photographer called with questions about the lighting requirements for the dress shots. Her gaze flicked to me, noticing the tension. "Is everything all right?" "Madeline just saw the wedding dress preview," my father said, his voice carefully neutral. My mother's smile didn't waver. "Isn't it stunning? The transformation is remarkable. Olivia wanted something unconventional, and this gives the dress such a beautiful second life instead of sitting in storage." "It wasn't just sitting in storage," I said. "It meant something to me." She waved a dismissive hand. "It was a prom dress, Madeline. Lovely, yes, but hardly the same significance as a wedding gown. Besides, your sister needs this. The Phillips family has certain expectations about presentation, and this design has already received industry attention. Because it was mine, I said, hearing the childish note in my voice and hating it. My mother's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Don't be selfish. This wedding represents a merger between two prominent families. The publicity will benefit the entire Laurent brand, including your future. I looked to my father, hoping to see recognition in his eyes, some acknowledgement of what was being taken from me. But he had already returned to his sketches, his silence a fortress I couldn't breach. I need some air, I managed to say, turning toward the door. The fittings are scheduled for tomorrow, my mother called after me. We need everyone to be supportive. Outside, the spring air felt too thin to properly fill my lungs. I walked without direction, past the manicured gardens that surrounded our family estate, beyond the gates that separated us from the ordinary world. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then insistent, but I welcomed it. At least the wetness on my face had an explanation. By the time I returned home, drenched and shivering, the house was quiet. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that my parents had gone to dinner with the Phillips family to discuss ceremony details. I peeled off my wet clothes, showered until the hot water ran out, and curled into bed without eating. My phone glowed with missed calls, 2 from my father, 1 from Eliza, and a text from my mother. Olivia is very upset. Call when you're ready to discuss this reasonably. I switched my phone to silent and stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible constellations in the darkness. What hurt most wasn't just losing the dress. It was realizing how easily my feelings could be dismissed, how family loyalty seemed to flow in only one direction. The dress was a symbol, but the betrayal was far more fundamental. Morning arrived with the kind of pristine sunlight that seemed to mock my sleepless night. I dressed mechanically and made my way downstairs, where voices drifted from the dining room. My sister's laugh, melodic and practiced, punctuated whatever story she was telling. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. My mother and Olivia sat at the table, wedding magazines spread between them, coffee cups steaming. My father stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear as he managed some business crisis, his back to the room. Olivia noticed me first, her smile dimming slightly before brightening again, with renewed intensity. Finally, Sleeping Beauty awakens. Come look at these flower arrangements. I remained where I was. I saw the dress. The room stilled. My father ended his call abruptly and turned around. My mother set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Isn't it magnificent? Olivia said, her tone light but eyes watchful. Daddy took my ideas and just elevated everything. The train will be spectacular coming down the cathedral steps. That was my dress, I said simply. The one he designed for me. Olivia's expression shifted to something resembling pity. It was inspired by your prom dress, yes. But this is a complete reimagining, much more sophisticated. The stars, I said. The constellations from my birthday. We changed those, my mother interjected. They're the constellations from Olivia and Camden's first date now. See? Completely different significance. I looked to my father, who seemed to be studying something fascinating on the floor. Dad? Is that true? He cleared his throat. The pattern is similar, but the meaning is different now, yes. Why didn't anyone ask me? You made that dress for me. It was special, because it was the only one. Olivia stood, crossing to me with arms outstretched, like she was approaching a skittish animal. Maddie, I needed something that would stand out. The Phillips family is expecting a statement piece, and Daddy's design for you was the most unique thing in his portfolio. It just made sense to build on that foundation. Foundation, I repeated. Like my experiences are just raw materials for your life. Don't be dramatic, my mother said sharply. This is about what's best for the family. The exposure from this wedding will elevate Laurent Designs to new heights. Your sister marrying into the Phillips empire opens doors that your father has been trying to access for years. So, my feelings don't matter? My mother's smile was brittle. Of course they matter, darling. But perhaps put them in perspective? It's a dress. Your sister is building a future that will benefit all of us. I didn't want to upset you, Olivia said, her eyes wide with practiced innocence. I thought you'd be happy to share something so beautiful. To be part of my special day. A strange calm settled over me. I'd spent years trying to fit myself into the spaces my family left for me, measuring my words and actions against their expectations. But in that moment, with the morning light streaming through windows that suddenly felt like barriers rather than portals, I recognized the futility of trying to make them understand a language they refused to learn. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be, I said finally. But I won't be attending, my mother gasped. Don't be ridiculous. Of course you'll be there. You're the maid of honor. Not anymore, I said, turning to leave. Madeline, my father called, his voice holding an authority that had once meant everything to me. This isn't just about a dress. This is about family loyalty. I paused in the doorway, not looking back. Exactly. For the next 3 weeks, I immersed myself in my thesis project, returning to school and the comfort of my tiny apartment near campus. I ignored my mother's increasingly frantic texts, deleted Olivia's voicemails without listening to them, and responded to my father's emails with brief, professional updates about my academics, but nothing more. Eliza kept me informed about wedding developments, how my cousin Tessa had been promoted to maid of honor, how my absence was being explained away as academic commitments, how the dress was featured in a prominent fashion blog as the couture wedding gown redefining bridal traditions. I told myself I was healing, that distance was the antiseptic my wounds needed. But late at night, alone with the hum of my sewing machine and scraps of fabric that would never become masterpieces, I felt the loss like a physical ache, not just of the dress, but of the illusion that my father and I shared something sacred. Then came the email from Professor Winters, my department chair. Prestigious opportunity. Laurent Designs seeking summer intern. Ideal for your focus. Recommendation already submitted. Attached was the formal application, already populated with my information and my father's signature as CEO, requesting my placement in the Textiles Innovation Department for the upcoming summer. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. This was my father's olive branch. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what had been taken, but a professional opportunity wrapped in the guise of mentorship. As if granting me access to his company could compensate for betraying our private language. For days, I left the email unanswered. The application neither accepted nor declined. I walked through campus in a fog, attended classes, submitted assignments, all while carrying the weight of an unresolved conversation. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, as I sat in the university library attempting to focus on fabric sustainability research, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Dad. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, perhaps the same instinct that had guided my fingers when learning to sew, made me answer. Madeline. His voice sounded different, stripped of its usual confidence. Are you well? I'm fine, I said, gathering my books and moving to a quieter corner of the library. Busy with finals. The internship, he began. Did you? I haven't decided yet. A pause. The sound of him exhaling slowly. That's not why I called. Another pause, longer this time. I waited, suddenly aware of my heartbeat. The dress, he finally said. Olivia's wedding dress. I've withdrawn it. My grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean? I told your mother and sister that I cannot, in good conscience, allow that particular design to be used. I've offered to create something new, something that belongs solely to Olivia, but I cannot repurpose what was meant for you. I sank into a nearby chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. Mom must be having a meltdown. A soft chuckle, tired but genuine. That would be an understatement. The Phillips family is confused. Your sister is adjusting. Why now? I asked, the question that had been burning in me since I first saw the redesigned dress. Why did you agree to it in the first place? Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of years of unspoken expectations and compromises. Because I lost sight of what matters, he finally said. Because I allowed myself to be guided by what would please others, rather than what I knew was right. Because I forgot, for a time, the promise I made when I created that dress for you. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. And what was that promise? That your vision matters. That what we create together has meaning beyond its function. That I would always see you, Madeline, not just what others want you to be. The sounds of the library faded around me, the rustle of pages turning, the soft tapping of keyboards, the whispered conversations. In their place was only my father's voice, stripped of pretense, offering not just an apology but a recognition. There will be consequences, I said, thinking of my mother's carefully cultivated social connections, of Olivia's expectations, of the Phillips family's influence. Yes, he agreed simply, but some prices are worth paying. I took a deep breath, feeling something tight in my chest begin to loosen. The internship is yours if you want it, regardless of your answer about the wedding. Your talent deserves recognition, independent of family politics. And the dress? I asked. Is where it belongs, he said. In the vault, preserved, waiting for whenever you decide its story should continue. We talked for another hour, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. About design philosophy and innovation, about family dynamics and expectations, about disappointments and hopes. It wasn't a perfect resolution, no fairy tale reconciliation that erased all hurts. But it was honest, and in that honesty was the foundation of something that felt like healing. When we finally hung up, I sat for a long time, watching raindrops trace patterns down the library windows. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean winning every battle. Sometimes it simply means being seen for who you truly are. 2 days after my conversation with my father, I received a text from Olivia. We need to talk. Coffee at Riverside tomorrow at 3? No exclamation points, no emojis. A stark departure from her usual effusive messaging style. I texted back a simple yes, and tried not to overthink what awaited me. The Riverside Cafe sat nestled between a bookstore and an artisan bakery, its wide windows overlooking the park where we'd played as children. I arrived early, claiming a corner table with my back to the wall, a defensive position I hadn't consciously chosen but recognized as telling nonetheless. When Olivia walked in, the cafe quieted momentarily. She had that effect on rooms, her entrance shifting the energy, drawing attention without demanding it. Today she wore cream-colored linen pants and a blush silk blouse, her hair swept into an elegant low bun. Nothing flashy, but the kind of effortless sophistication that had always seemed to elude me. She spotted me immediately, her smile tight but determined as she navigated between tables. A cappuccino appeared before her almost instantly, the staff recognizing her as a regular despite my more frequent patronage. You look well, she said, arranging herself in the chair across from me. School seems to agree with you. It does, I replied, wrapping my hands around my mug of chai. How are the wedding plans? Her perfectly manicured fingers tensed slightly around her cup. That's what I wanted to discuss. I waited, determined not to fill the silence. Let her be the one to acknowledge what had happened. Daddy told me he's withdrawing the dress, she finally said, her voice carefully modulated to reveal nothing. He's offered to design something new, but with the wedding 6 weeks away, I'd have to select a backup from another designer to be safe. I'm sorry about the timing, I said, and found that I partially meant it. Despite everything, I understood the pressure she faced. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Are you? Because it seems like you got exactly what you wanted. The accusation hung between us, familiar territory in our relationship. Her perception that any boundary I established was merely an attempt to deprive her of something. What I wanted, I said carefully, was to be consulted about something that was deeply personal to me. What I wanted was for my feelings to matter to my family. It's just a dress, Madeline. No, it never was. And you know that. She looked away, her gaze fixing on something outside the window. You don't understand the pressure. The Phillips family has connections throughout the industry. This wedding isn't just about Camden and me. It's about securing Laurent Designs' future, about making Mom and Dad proud. And that required taking the one thing Dad ever created just for me? Her eyes snapped back to mine. A flash of something. Guilt? Frustration? crossing her features before disappearing behind practiced poise. I saw how he looked at you when you wore that dress at prom. How proud he was. I just wanted... She trailed off, then shook her head. It doesn't matter now. Understanding dawned slowly. A revelation I should have seen earlier. You were jealous, I said softly, of my relationship with Dad. Olivia laughed, but it sounded brittle. Don't be ridiculous. I'm his star, the face of Laurent Designs. Everyone knows that. The face, yes, but not the heart. She set down her cappuccino with deliberate care. You have no idea what it's like being the one everyone expects perfection from. You get to hide in the workrooms, experimenting with your sustainable fabrics and recycled materials, while I'm the one who has to represent the Laurent legacy at every function, every photo shoot, every interview. I never asked to be excluded from those things, I pointed out. That was Mom's decision. You were the one with the right look for the brand. Olivia's expression softened slightly. You really don't see it, do you? How special your connection with him is. You share something I can't touch, that creative wavelength, that ability to transform ideas into something tangible. Mom pushed me into the spotlight because it was the only place left for me to matter. I sat back, momentarily speechless. All these years, I'd viewed Olivia as the golden child, the daughter who effortlessly commanded our parents' attention and approval. I'd never considered that she might be looking back at me with the same envy. The dress, I finally said. Why didn't you just ask me? She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. Would you have said yes? I don't know, I admitted. But I deserved the chance to make that choice. Mom said it would be easier to present it as a fait accompli. That you'd eventually understand it was for the greater good of the family. She sighed. I should have known better, but it was easier to believe her. The revelation wasn't exactly an apology, but it was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I studied my sister's face. The faint shadows under her eyes, carefully concealed with makeup, the tension in her jaw that spoke of sleepless nights. Dad will create something incredible for you, I said. Something that's truly yours. There's no time, she replied, shaking her head. The fittings, the alterations, the photographer who's already scheduled the concept shoot, it's impossible. An idea formed, tentative, but growing clearer. What if we worked on it together? Dad and I? Olivia looked up sharply. What do you mean? I could take a brief leave from school. We could design something new, something that represents you and Camden, not a repurposed version of my dress. Between Dad's expertise and my technical skills, we could make it happen. You would do that? After everything? I considered the question carefully. Was I ready to extend this olive branch? To immerse myself in wedding preparations that would inevitably involve my mother's cutting remarks and judgmental glances? Not for Mom, I said finally. Not even entirely for you, but for Dad and for myself. To prove that creating something new is always better than trying to reshape something that already has its own integrity. A genuine smile spread across Olivia's face, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I've missed you, Maddie, more than I realized. I've missed parts of you too, I replied honestly. Maybe we can find our way back to being sisters instead of competitors. We spent the next hour talking, really talking, about her relationship with Camden, more complex than the fairy tale narrative my mother promoted, about my research in sustainable textiles, which she admitted to following through industry publications, about the pressure we both felt to live up to the Laurent name in our different spheres. By the time we parted, hugging briefly but sincerely on the sidewalk outside the cafe, something had shifted. Not healed entirely, but acknowledged, the first step toward a different kind of relationship. I called my father that evening, explaining the proposal. His relief was palpable, his enthusiasm immediate. We'll start tomorrow, he said. Come to the studio at 7. We'll have it to ourselves before the staff arrives. The next morning, I arrived at Laurent Designs headquarters before dawn, the massive glass and steel building mostly dark, except for the soft glow emanating from my father's private studio on the top floor. The security guard nodded in recognition as I swiped my still-active badge and made my way to the elevator. My father was already at his drawing table when I entered, dozens of sketches spread before him, coffee cooling at his elbow. He looked up when the door opened, his face lighting with a smile that erased years of tension. "I've been thinking about structure," he said without preamble, gesturing me closer. "Olivia has always been drawn to clean lines, architectural elements. Nothing fussy." I set my bag down and pulled up a stool beside him, examining his preliminary sketches. "These are beautiful, but they're still coming from our aesthetic, not hers." He raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "We see fashion as art, as expression. Olivia sees it as transformation, a way to become whoever she needs to be in the moment." I picked up a pencil, pulling a fresh sheet of paper toward me. "She needs a dress that helps her transform from Olivia Laurent to Olivia Phillips while still honoring both identities." For the next hour, we sketched together, my father's masterful hand bringing structure and proportion, while I focused on symbolic elements and transitional details. We barely spoke, falling into the rhythmic understanding that had always characterized our best collaborative moments. By the time the building began to hum with arriving employees, we had the bones of something extraordinary. A gown that featured a removable overlay, allowing Olivia to present one silhouette for the ceremony and transform into something more modern for the reception. The bodice incorporated subtle nods to both family crests, and the train featured hand-painted silk that would fade from Laurent blue to Phillips gold. "This," my father said, sitting back and studying our work, "is exactly right." "We'll need to move quickly," I replied, already mentally calculating fabric requirements and construction timelines. "And we'll need help." He nodded, reaching for his phone. "I'll clear my schedule for the next 3 weeks and bring in our best team. If anyone asks, it's a special project," I finished, understanding the need for discretion until we were certain we could deliver. What followed was the most intense design sprint of my life. 18-hour days in the studio, sleeping on the leather couch in my father's office, subsisting on delivered meals, and the adrenaline of creative collaboration. We assembled a small, trusted team. Marta, the head seamstress who had known me since childhood, Raphael, whose beadwork was unparalleled, and Elena, the textile specialist whose dyeing techniques would bring our gradient vision to life. My mother appeared occasionally, hovering at the periphery with thinly veiled skepticism. "This seems unnecessarily complicated," she remarked on the 5th day, eyeing the muslin prototype with distaste. "The Phillips family is expecting something traditional." "Trust the process, Vivienne," my father replied without looking up from where he was adjusting a seam. "This will exceed all expectations." I waited for her to undermine his confidence, to remind him of the stakes as she had so often throughout my childhood. Instead, she watched us for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her features before she turned and left without another word. 2 weeks into the project, with the basic structure completed and the hand beating underway, Olivia came for her first official fitting. She entered the studio hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome in this creative space that had always been more my territory than hers. "Close your eyes," my father instructed, positioning her on the fitting platform. When she opened them, facing the 3-way mirror with the partially completed gown draped on her frame, her sharp intake of breath told us everything. It's me," she whispered, turning slightly to watch how the fabric moved. "But a version of me I've never seen before." "That's the point," I said, stepping forward to adjust the shoulder detail. "Not who you've been, not who everyone expects you to be, but who you're choosing to become." Her eyes met mine in the mirror, shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply. In that moment, something healed between us. Not completely, not permanently perhaps, but enough to remind me that underneath the competition and the misunderstandings, she was still my sister. We had both been shaped by the same forces, just in different directions. The final week before the wedding passed in a blur of last-minute adjustments and panic over details. My mother, seeing the dress take its final form, became unexpectedly supportive, using her considerable influence to ensure everything from the lighting design to the floral arrangements would complement our creation. It wasn't an apology, she seemed constitutionally incapable of those, but it was an acknowledgement that we had created something worthy of the Laurent name. The night before the wedding, I found myself alone in the studio, making a final inspection of the gown now hanging in isolated splendor on a custom form. In the hushed quiet, surrounded by the remnants of our frantic creation process, discarded sketches, spools of thread, empty coffee cups, I felt a complex mix of pride and melancholy. My father's voice came softly from the doorway. "You should be resting. Tomorrow will be a long day." I smiled without turning around. "Just making sure everything's perfect." He crossed the room to stand beside me, his presence as familiar as my own reflection. "It already is. Because of you." "Because of us," I corrected. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small blue velvet box. "I have something for you." Inside lay a pendant, a delicate silver constellation that matched the original stars from my prom dress. "I saved these," he said quietly, "when we removed them from your dress during those first misguided alterations. I couldn't bear to discard them." I lifted the necklace with trembling fingers. "You kept them all this time?" "Some things are too precious to lose," he replied, taking the pendant and moving behind me to fasten it around my neck. "Just like some relationships." The weight of the stars against my collarbone felt right, a physical reminder that what we create and who we love cannot be easily erased, even when the visible manifestations change form. "Will you help me with something else?" he asked, leading me to his private design cabinet. From inside, he removed a garment bag and carefully unzipped it. My breath caught. Inside was my original prom dress, restored to its midnight blue glory, the damage from the attempted alterations meticulously repaired. "How?" I whispered. "With great difficulty," he admitted. "It wasn't perfect, but I knew I had to try. Some mistakes can be mended, even if the scars remain." I touched the fabric reverently, feeling the years collapse between then and now. "Why?" "Because I want you to wear it tomorrow," he said. "Not as a bridesmaid, in whatever generic dress your mother selected, but as yourself. As my daughter and a Laurent designer in your own right." "Mom will have a fit," I said, already imagining her reaction to this deviation from the carefully planned aesthetic. My father smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Let her. Some traditions need breaking." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of pristine spring day that photographers pray for, and wedding planners include in their contracts with the gods. I dressed slowly in my apartment, carefully stepping into the restored midnight blue gown that still fit as if it had been created yesterday rather than years ago. The constellation pendant gleamed at my throat, catching the light as I moved. In the mirror, I saw not just a reflection, but a declaration of worth, of talent, of belonging on my own terms. When I arrived at the cathedral, slipping in through the side entrance we'd used for family during rehearsal, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation with my mother. Instead, I found her in the bride's room, helping Olivia with the final touches on the gown we'd created. She looked up when I entered, her eyes widening at the sight of me in the restored dress. I waited for the cutting remark, the reminder that today wasn't about me, the accusation of attention-seeking. Instead, she simply said, "You both look exactly as you should," before turning back to adjust Olivia's veil. Coming from her, it was as close to blessing as I was likely to get. The ceremony itself was a blur of flowers and music, of Camden's face transforming with wonder as Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle, of my father's quiet pride as he walked his eldest daughter toward her future. I stood not with the bridesmaids in their blush-colored gowns, but near my father, where he'd insisted I belong. At the reception, as Olivia unveiled the transformation element of her dress to gasps of appreciation from the assembled guests, a distinguished older man approached where I stood with my father. "Remarkable work, Vincent," he said, his British accent pronounced. "The construction is unlike anything I've seen from Laurent Designs before." "Because it wasn't just me," my father replied, placing a hand on my shoulder. "This was a true collaboration with my younger daughter, Madeline." She'll be joining the company officially after she completes her degree. I blinked in surprise. This was news to me. If you'll accept the position, my father added, meeting my eyes with a question in his. Before I could respond, the British man extended his hand to me. Frederick Harlow, Vogue International. I'd be very interested in featuring this collaborative process in our September issue. New voices in established houses are exactly what the industry needs right now. As we discussed possibilities for the feature, I caught sight of Olivia across the room, radiant in the gown we'd created together. She caught my eye and raised her champagne glass in a silent toast, not of victory or concession, but of recognition, of possibility. Later that night, as the celebration continued around us, my father and I slipped away to the quiet of the garden terrace. Stars glittered overhead, mirroring the constellations that had become our shared symbol. Did you mean it? I asked. About joining the company. He nodded, his expression serious. Laurent Designs needs your vision, Madeline, not just as my daughter, but as a designer with your own unique perspective. The sustainable practices you've been researching, your commitment to ethical production, these are the future of fashion. And Mom? We'll adjust, he said simply. As we all must. I touched the pendant at my throat, thinking of the journey that had brought us here, from a prom dress created with love, through betrayal and misunderstanding, to this moment of potential reconciliation. Not just with my father, or even with Olivia, but with the legacy of our family name, and what it could mean going forward. I'll consider it, I said finally, but on one condition. Name it. That we create a mentorship program for young designers from underprivileged backgrounds. No connections needed, just raw talent and vision. He smiled, the pride in his eyes unmistakable, already thinking like a CEO. No, I corrected gently. Thinking like someone who knows what it means to have your voice heard, and what it costs when it isn't. As we rejoined the celebration, I carried with me a new understanding. Sometimes reclaiming what's yours isn't about possession, or even restoration. Sometimes it's about recognizing that what truly matters cannot be stolen or diminished. The capacity to create, to connect, to transform pain into beauty. My midnight blue dress, with its constellation of stars that had witnessed both loss and renewal, wasn't just a garment anymore. It was proof that our stories, like the designs we create, can be altered and adapted without losing their essential truth. That what seems like an ending can become, with courage and care, the beginning of something even more beautiful. The afterglow of Olivia's wedding lingered for weeks, transforming the Laurent family dynamics in subtle but significant ways. I returned to school to complete my final semester, armed with a newfound confidence and the tentative promise of a future role at Laurent Designs. My father and I spoke daily, discussing everything from my thesis project to his latest collection. Even my mother's communications softened, her usual critiques replaced by cautious inquiries about my studies and occasional updates about industry acquaintances, who had admired my midnight blue dress at the reception. Frederick Harlow from Vogue made good on his interest, scheduling a photo shoot and interview for the September issue that would feature both the wedding gown and my restored prom dress. Reclaiming Design, the Laurent legacy reimagined by father and daughter would be the headline, accompanied by an editorial spread showcasing the evolution of my father's aesthetic through our collaboration. When the article finally appeared in print, 3 months after the wedding, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Industry leaders praised the transparency about our creative process, the honesty regarding family conflict, and most importantly, the innovative design that had emerged from reconciliation. I was in the university library when my phone began buzzing incessantly with notifications. Confused, I silenced it and continued working on my final thesis presentation. It wasn't until hours later, emerging into the warm June sunshine, that I checked my messages and understood why. The Vogue feature had gone viral, not just within fashion circles but across social media platforms. My father had been booked for 3 morning shows. Olivia was fielding calls from celebrities requesting similar transformational pieces for upcoming events. And my own inbox was flooded with speaking invitations from design schools and sustainability conferences. Most surprising was a text from my mother. Your perspective adds something vital to the Laurent brand. We should discuss how to incorporate this when you graduate. I stared at my phone, half expecting the message to transform into something more familiar. A critique, a reminder of my shortcomings, a comparison to Olivia's more marketable talents. But it remained unchanged. A small but significant olive branch extended across years of misunderstanding. That evening, I called my father. "Have you seen the response to the article?" I asked when he answered. "Impossible to miss," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Even that luxury hotel group that's been hesitant about a partnership is suddenly eager to discuss branded textiles for their new properties. "Mom texted me," I said, still processing this development. "Something about incorporating my perspective into the brand." A brief pause. "She's been different since the wedding. Since seeing what we created together. I think perhaps she's realizing there's more than one way to build a legacy." "Do you think she means it?" "Your mother rarely says things she doesn't mean," he replied carefully. "Her perspective may be limited at times, but she's not insincere." I considered this as I watched the sunset paint my apartment walls in shades of amber and rose. "The article calls me the future of Laurent Designs." "Are you?" he asked simply. The question hung between us, weighted with possibility and uncertainty. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But I'm open to finding out." 2 weeks later, I defended my thesis. A comprehensive blueprint for integrating sustainable practices into luxury fashion without compromising craftsmanship or aesthetic value. My faculty advisors were impressed, but what meant more was seeing my father and, surprisingly, my mother sitting in the back row of the presentation hall, their presence a silent vote of confidence. After the formal reception that followed, my mother approached me, elegantly dressed as always, but with something almost hesitant in her demeanor. "Your research is quite thorough," she said, handing me a glass of champagne. "Particularly the section on consumer perception of sustainability as a luxury indicator rather than a compromise." I blinked, taken aback by her specific reference. "You actually read my paper?" A flicker of hurt crossed her features before she composed herself. "Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? Because you've never shown interest in my academic work before," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I simply thanked her and allowed the conversation to shift toward safer territory. The upcoming Paris Fashion Week, a retrospective of my father's early work being planned at the Metropolitan Museum. Later that evening, as we were leaving the university, my father pulled me aside. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said. "We'd like you to join us for dinner tomorrow night. There's something we want to discuss." "Should I be worried?" I asked, only half joking. He smiled. "No. But it is important." The restaurant they chose was one of Baltimore's oldest and most respected establishments, a place where deals were made, marriages proposed, and family announcements shared with appropriate gravitas. I arrived to find them already seated at a corner table, my father in his characteristic charcoal suit, my mother resplendent in burgundy silk that complemented her silver-streaked dark hair. After ordering and exchanging pleasantries, my mother set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "We've been discussing the future of Laurent Designs," she began. "Specifically, the leadership structure moving forward." I tensed, unsure where this was headed. "I thought Dad wasn't planning to retire for years." "I'm not," my father confirmed. "But recent events have made us reconsider how we're positioning the brand for long-term success." My mother nodded. "The response to your collaboration has been extraordinary. It's opened doors we've been knocking on for years." "I'm glad," I said cautiously. "But I'm not sure what that has to do with leadership structure." My father leaned forward slightly. "We want to create a new division within Laurent Designs. One focused on sustainable luxury and innovative textiles, the very areas your research has explored. With you at the helm," my mother added. "Reporting directly to the board, not through existing management channels." I sat back, momentarily speechless. This wasn't just a job offer. This was an acknowledgement of my vision as distinct from, but equal to, my father's original concept for the brand. "Why now?" I finally asked. My mother's gaze was direct, unwavering. "Because I was wrong," she said simply. "I've spent years trying to fit both you and Olivia into predetermined roles that I thought would best serve the company. I pushed Olivia toward the spotlight because she had the presence, the charisma I believed a luxury brand required in its public face. And I encouraged you toward the technical side because your talent seemed better suited to behind-the-scenes innovation. What I failed to recognize, she continued, was that by enforcing these boundaries, I was limiting what Laurent Designs could become. The wedding gown you and your father created together, that was a revelation. Not just the design itself, but what it represented, tradition and innovation in perfect balance. I looked to my father, who nodded encouragement. The company needs both, he said. The established aesthetic that built our reputation, and the forward-thinking approach that will secure our future. And Olivia? I asked. Where does she fit in this new structure? She's been offered the role of creative brand ambassador, my mother replied, focusing on client relations and special projects rather than design direction. She's actually the one who suggested we create a separate division for you. This revelation surprised me more than the offer itself. She did? Your sister has always understood people better than either of us gave her credit for, my father said with a slight smile. She recognizes that her strengths and yours are complementary, not competitive. I stared down at my untouched appetizer, mind racing. I would need time to think about this. Of course, my mother said, though the board is eager to make an announcement before the fall collection preview. This isn't a decision to rush, my father countered gently. Madeline needs to be certain this is the right path for her. The remainder of dinner passed pleasantly enough, conversation drifting to safer topics. But as I drove home afterward, the weight of their offer pressed upon me. Was this truly recognition of my talent and vision? Or was it an attempt to bind me to family expectations in a more palatable form? The next morning, I called the one person who might offer perspective unclouded by Laurent politics. Eliza, I need advice, I said when my cousin answered. And brutal honesty. We met at her apartment across town, where she was in the midst of packing for a photography assignment in Iceland. Eliza had always been the family rebel, choosing photojournalism over the family business, moving into a tiny walk-up rather than accepting the condo her parents offered, dating whomever she pleased regardless of social standing or family approval. So they want to crown you Princess of Sustainability, she said after I explained the offer. Complete with your own kingdom and subjects. I winced at her characterization. When you put it that way, it sounds like a consolation prize. Is it? She countered, folding a thermal jacket with practiced efficiency. Or is it recognition that you've earned through your own merit? That's what I can't figure out, I admitted. I know my research has value, and I believe in the direction I'm proposing for sustainable luxury, but I'm not sure I can separate my professional judgment from all the family history wrapped up in this decision. Eliza sat cross-legged on her bed, studying me with the same intensity she brought to her photography. What's the alternative? Taking your ideas to a competitor? Starting your own boutique brand? Working for a fashion conglomerate where you'd have less creative control but more distance from family politics? I hadn't seriously considered these options, having been so focused on the binary choice of joining Laurent Designs or rejecting my family's legacy entirely. The thing about the Laurents, Eliza continued, is that they're terrible at separating the personal from the professional. Aunt Vivienne has always seen you and Olivia as extensions of the brand first, daughters second. Uncle Vincent loves you both, but he's been playing peacekeeper for so long he sometimes forgets to take a stand when it matters. Her assessment was harsh, but not inaccurate. And what about me? Where do I fit in this dysfunctional tapestry? She smiled. You're the one who sees things as they could be, not just as they are. It's what makes you a good designer, that ability to envision transformation. The question is whether you can apply that same vision to your relationship with the family business. I stayed with Eliza through the afternoon, helping her pack while we discussed possibilities. By the time I left, I had the outline of a plan, not an answer yet, but a framework for finding one. Over the next week, I met separately with key figures who could offer insight into what accepting the Laurent Designs offer might mean. First was Raymond Chen, my graduate advisor whose own career had spanned both independent design and corporate fashion houses. Family businesses are complex ecosystems, he said as we walked through the campus sculpture garden. The advantages are significant. Built-in trust, shared values, long-term perspective. But the boundaries between personal and professional relationships can become dangerously blurred. How do I prevent that? I asked. Written agreements, he said without hesitation. Clear reporting structures. And most importantly, a willingness to have uncomfortable conversations early and often. Next was Marta, the head seamstress who had mentored me since childhood and knew the inner workings of Laurent Designs better than anyone outside the family. Your father has always seen your potential, she told me over coffee in her small apartment above a bakery downtown. But your mother, she has feared for you. Feared? I repeated, surprised by this characterization. Marta nodded, her weathered hands cradling her mug. The fashion industry was different when she entered it, more cutthroat, less forgiving, especially of women. I think perhaps she pushed Olivia toward the spotlight, and you toward the technical side, because she believed she was protecting you both, playing to your strengths in a world that would exploit your weaknesses. This perspective hadn't occurred to me, that my mother's controlling nature might stem from misguided protection rather than simple ambition or preference for Olivia. And now? I asked. What do you think has changed? The wedding dress, Marta said simply. It showed her that vulnerability can be strength, that your sensitivity to design and material isn't a liability but your greatest asset. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded her why she fell in love with fashion in the first place. Not for the status or the business connections, but for the magic of creation. Finally, I arranged to meet Olivia for lunch at a small bistro near her new apartment. Marriage had changed her in subtle ways, a softening around the edges, a quiet confidence that seemed to come from within, rather than from external validation. So, she said after we'd ordered, has Mom been calling you daily about the new division? I laughed. Only texting, surprisingly. She's showing remarkable restraint. That's new, Olivia agreed with a wry smile. Camden says she's been positively cordial with his mother lately. Almost friendly. The world must be ending. We shared a moment of sisterly understanding, the kind that had been rare in our adult relationship but felt increasingly natural since the wedding. I need to ask you something, I said finally. And I need you to be completely honest, even if it's uncomfortable. She nodded, her expression turning serious. Of course. Was this division your idea? Really? Or is that just what they told me to make the offer more appealing? Olivia didn't answer immediately, taking a sip of her water as if buying time to formulate her response. It was my suggestion, she said finally, but not exactly in the way they probably presented it. What do you mean? After the wedding, after seeing what you and Dad created together, I realized something important about myself, she explained. I've never wanted to be a designer. Not really. What I've wanted is to be important to the family legacy, to matter in a way that felt tangible. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that reminded me of when we were children, sharing secrets after bedtime. Being the face of Laurent Designs gave me that. The photo shoots, the interviews, the client relationships, that's where I thrive. But I've been pretending to have design input I don't actually possess, because I thought that was the only way to be truly valuable to the company. So when the Vogue article came out, it was liberating, she finished. Suddenly, there was this clear demonstration that the company needs different types of talent. That my skills in relationship building and brand representation are legitimate contributions, not just consolation prizes for lacking design vision. I considered this, seeing my sister perhaps more clearly than I ever had before. So you suggested a division for me because it makes sense for the company, for Dad's legacy, and for both of us as individuals, she said simply. I'm tired of competing with you, Maddie. I'm tired of feeling like there's only one path to success in this family. And I suspect you are too. Her honesty was refreshing, cutting through years of misunderstanding with the precision of well-wielded shears through silk. I am, I admitted. But I'm afraid of being swallowed up by Laurent Designs, of losing the perspective I've gained through distance. Then don't let that happen, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Set boundaries. Maintain your outside connections. And when necessary, stand your ground. You're pretty good at that, as it turns out. The warmth in her eyes held no resentment, only a sister's knowing appreciation. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt we were truly seeing each other as allies, rather than rivals. After a week of consultations and soul-searching, I requested a formal meeting with my parents at Laurent Designs headquarters. The setting was deliberate. This would be a business discussion, not a family dinner. They received me in the main conference room, the wall of windows overlooking the city providing a dramatic backdrop. My father sat relaxed but attentive, while my mother maintained her characteristic perfect posture, a portfolio open before her. "I've been considering your offer," I began, "and I'm prepared to accept with certain conditions." My mother's eyebrow arched slightly, but she nodded for me to continue. "First, the Sustainable Luxury Division needs complete creative autonomy, with its own budget and staff. I'll report to the board on quarterly results, but day-to-day decisions need to remain within the division." My father nodded. "That's reasonable. What else?" "Second, I want to establish a scholarship program for young designers focused on sustainable fashion. One that provides not just financial support, but mentorship and potential pathways to employment at Laurent Designs." "That could be arranged," my mother said, making a note in her portfolio. "Though the board will want specifics on funding allocation and selection criteria." "I'll provide those," I assured her. "Third, and most importantly, I want a clear understanding that my role in the company is professional, not familial. In the office, I'm a division head, not a daughter. Decisions will be made based on business metrics and creative vision, not personal history." My mother's pen paused over her notebook. "That's more complicated, but necessary," my father interjected. "For all of us." She looked between us, perhaps recognizing for the first time how similar we were in our approach to creative integrity. "Very well," she said finally. "Is there anything else?" I took a deep breath. "One last thing. I want the midnight blue dress, my original prom dress, to be formally registered as my intellectual property, not a Laurent Designs asset. It remains mine, regardless of my employment status with the company." A smile tugged at my father's lips. "Already done," he said. "I filed the paperwork the day after the wedding." "You did?" Both my mother and I asked in unison. He nodded. "Some designs transcend commercial consideration. That one belongs to your personal legacy, Madeline, not the company archives." My mother looked like she wanted to protest, but thought better of it. Instead, she closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. "If those are your conditions, I believe we have an agreement. I'll have legal draw up the appropriate contracts." "Thank you," I said, maintaining the professional tone we'd established. "I look forward to reviewing them." As the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave the conference room, my mother hesitated. "There's one more thing," she said, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in her voice. "The Met retrospective of your father's work that's being planned for next year, we'd like to include a section on collaborative design, featuring both the wedding gown and your original prom dress, if you're amenable." The request surprised me, not just for its content, but for the way she presented it, as a genuine question rather than a foregone conclusion. "I'd be honored," I replied, and meant it. Something shifted in her expression then, a softening around the eyes that made her look suddenly more like the young designer who had fallen in love with my father decades ago than the formidable business matriarch she'd become. "Thank you," she said simply. As we walked out together, my father fell into step beside me. "You handled that beautifully," he murmured. "I had a good teacher," I replied. "Several, actually." Outside, the late summer sun cast long shadows across the plaza in front of Laurent Designs headquarters. My mother excused herself to take a call from an important client, leaving my father and me alone for a moment. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, studying my face with the attention he usually reserved for examining fabric quality. "It won't be easy, redefining your place in the family and the company simultaneously." I looked up at the gleaming building that housed generations of Laurent creativity, then back to my father, the man who had taught me that design was a language, materials were vocabulary, and every garment told a story about its creator and wearer alike. "Nothing worthwhile ever is," I said. "But some things are worth fighting for. Worth reclaiming when they've been taken, worth reimagining when they need to evolve." He nodded, understanding that I was talking about more than just a career decision. "Like a dress," he said softly. "Like a dress," I agreed. "And the hands that created it." Together, we walked back toward the building that would now house not just one Laurent vision, but many. A tapestry of perspectives woven from the same fundamental threads, but creating patterns neither of us could have designed alone. The first 6 months at Laurent Designs passed in a whirlwind of creation, confrontation, and compromise. Establishing the sustainable luxury division wasn't simply a matter of hanging a new sign on a door. It required reimagining how a traditional fashion house could evolve without losing its essential character. I assembled a team of 12, 3 from within the company who shared my vision, and 9 from outside who brought fresh perspectives from sustainability startups, material science programs, and ethical manufacturing initiatives. My mother watched this recruitment process with barely concealed skepticism. "They have impressive environmental credentials," she remarked after reviewing my final selections. "But do any of them truly understand luxury?" "That's precisely why we need them," I explained. "They'll challenge our assumptions about what luxury means in the 21st century. Is it still about exclusivity and rarity? Or is it evolving toward transparency, longevity, and conscious creation?" She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't interfere. A small victory in our evolving professional relationship. My father, meanwhile, became an unexpected bridge between my division and the traditional Laurent design teams. He instituted weekly cross-departmental reviews, where designers from both sides would present their work for collaborative feedback. These sessions were tense at first, with veterans viewing my team's innovations as implicit criticism of established practices. But gradually, a productive dialogue emerged. "The bias cut technique you're using for the evening collection," one of my sustainable fabric specialists said during the third review, addressing my father's lead designer, "could be adapted for our bamboo silk if we modified the grain slightly. You'd maintain the drape but reduce water consumption by nearly 60%. The lead designer's initial defensiveness gave way to genuine curiosity. By the following week, they were collaborating on prototypes that combined traditional craftsmanship with sustainable materials. My first major challenge came 3 months in, when I discovered that a supplier my mother had contracted for the main line's accessories was violating the labor standards we'd established for the sustainable division. The evidence was irrefutable: undercover footage from a workers' rights organization showing unsafe conditions and employees working excessive hours without proper compensation. I brought the documentation to my mother's office, bracing for conflict. "We have a 12-year relationship with Meridian Accessories," she said after reviewing the evidence, her voice measured. "They've consistently delivered quality pieces on schedule. Do you understand how difficult it would be to replace them before the spring collection deadline?" "I do," I acknowledged. "But I also understand that continuing to work with them directly contradicts the values we're claiming to uphold in my division. It makes us hypocrites." "This isn't just about your division," she countered. "This is about meeting commitments to retailers who have already placed orders based on designs that incorporate Meridian's hardware." I had anticipated this response and came prepared. "I've identified 3 alternative suppliers who can meet our specifications and timeline. 2 are slightly more expensive, but the third has offered to match Meridian's pricing for the first year if we commit to a 3-year contract." My mother's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I had considered the business implications rather than simply taking a moral stance. "The board won't appreciate a last-minute supplier change," she said, but her tone had shifted from rejection to consideration. "The board will appreciate even less the public relations disaster if these working conditions are exposed while we're actively promoting our commitment to ethical production," I responded. "I can present the alternatives at tomorrow's meeting if you'd prefer." For a moment, we regarded each other across her immaculate desk, not as mother and daughter, but as 2 executives with different priorities yet shared ultimate goals. "I'll review your alternatives," she finally said, "and we'll approach the board together." 2 weeks later, Meridian Accessories was no longer a Laurent Designs supplier, and my credibility with both my team and the broader company had strengthened considerably. My mother, to my surprise, presented the decision to industry peers at a conference as evidence of Laurent's rigorous ongoing assessment of supply chain ethics, taking what could have been perceived as a correction of a mistake and reframing it as a demonstration of corporate values. "That was well played," I told her afterward, as we shared a rare moment alone in the hotel lobby. A small smile touched her lips. "I've been managing corporate image since before you were born, Madeline. The key is to make necessary changes appear intentional rather than reactive. Is that what you're doing with me? I asked, the question emerging before I could reconsider. Making my presence at Laurent appear as a planned evolution rather than a correction of past oversights? Instead of the defensive response I expected, she regarded me thoughtfully. Perhaps initially, she admitted. But you've proven to be more transformative than I anticipated. Coming from my mother, this constituted high praise indeed. The real test of our new family and professional dynamic came 4 months into my tenure, when Laurent Designs was invited to participate in the prestigious Reimagine Fashion Summit in Copenhagen, an event focused on the future of sustainable luxury. The invitation specifically requested participation from both the traditional Laurent Design leadership and the new sustainable division. They want us to present a unified vision, my father explained during our family dinner, a tradition we'd cautiously reinstated on Sunday evenings. Not just individual collections, but a cohesive philosophy for how heritage and innovation coexist. That's an enormous opportunity, Olivia said, her marketing instincts immediately recognizing the potential. The coverage alone would be invaluable. My mother nodded. The timing aligns perfectly with the fall collection launch. Vincent, you should lead with the historical perspective, then transition to how the core aesthetic is evolving. And Madeline can present the technological innovations, my father added. The recycled cashmere process alone will generate significant interest. I set down my fork carefully. Actually, I think we should approach this differently. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me with varying degrees of surprise. The summit isn't looking for parallel presentations. They want evidence that luxury fashion houses can truly integrate sustainability rather than treating it as a separate initiative. I explained. We should develop a capsule collection specifically for this event, one that merges Dad's architectural silhouettes with our new materials and production methods. That would require significant resources, my mother pointed out. And we're already committed to 2 full collections, which is why we should make it small but impactful. 5 pieces that tell the story of Laurent's evolution. Not just designs on a runway, but a narrative about transformation. My father's expression brightened with interest. What did you have in mind? A retrospective approach, I said, warming to the concept as I articulated it. We select one iconic piece from each decade of Laurent Designs' history and reimagine it using sustainable methods and materials. The final piece would be entirely new, a representation of the future we're building together. A thoughtful silence fell over the table as they considered the proposal. I could see my father mentally reviewing his archive, already considering which designs might best represent each era. Olivia was nodding slightly, likely envisioning the marketing possibilities. My mother remained inscrutable, her gaze fixed on her wine glass. It would be a significant undertaking, she finally said, particularly with our existing commitments. It would, I agreed. But think about what it represents. Not just another collection, but a declaration of Laurent Designs' ability to honor its heritage while embracing radical innovation. I like it, my father said decisively. It's exactly the kind of statement that would distinguish us at an event where every design house will be showcasing their sustainability credentials. My mother looked between us, perhaps recognizing that familiar creative connection that had produced the wedding gown. Very well, she conceded. But the regular collections cannot suffer as a result. I'll adjust the project management schedule to accommodate this additional work. I have another suggestion, I said, sensing an opening. What if we approach this as a true family collaboration? Not just Dad and me, but all 4 of us. Olivia raised an eyebrow. I'm not a designer. No, but you understand how designs translate to brand identity better than anyone, I replied. And Mom's knowledge of Laurent Designs' history is unparalleled. She knows which pieces resonated most strongly with clients across different eras. My mother's expression softened almost imperceptibly. For years, her contributions to the company had been essential, but often overshadowed by my father's more visible creative role. This acknowledgement of her expertise, offered sincerely rather than strategically, seemed to touch something rarely exposed. A Laurent family collaboration, my father mused, reaching for my mother's hand across the table. Like the old days, when we were just starting out, a memory flickered across my mother's face, something private and precious from their early years together. "I suppose we could try," she said, with uncharacteristic tentativeness, "though I expect we'll have different opinions on which designs are truly iconic." "That's the point," I said, smiling. "The tension between different perspectives is where innovation happens." Olivia raised her glass. "To productive tension, then." We clinked glasses. A tenuous alliance formed around a shared creative purpose. None of us could have predicted how this collaboration would test and ultimately transform our understanding of family, legacy, and personal identity. The Copenhagen project began with what my father jokingly called the Great Laurent Archive excavation. The company's temperature-controlled storage facility housed every significant design from the past 30 years, some as finished garments, others as patterns and extensive documentation. My mother approached the selection process with characteristic thoroughness, creating a detailed spreadsheet of potential candidates with columns for critical acclaim, commercial success, and technical innovation. My father preferred a more intuitive method, pulling pieces that had special meaning to him regardless of their public reception. Olivia focused on designs that had generated significant media coverage or represented pivotal moments in the brand's public identity. I watched their selection processes with fascination, recognizing how each approach reflected their unique relationship to the Laurent legacy. When we finally gathered in the main studio to make our final decisions, the resulting conversation was surprisingly revealing. "The 1997 architectural asymmetry evening gown," my mother said, pointing to a striking black design with geometric cutouts. It was featured in every major publication and established Laurent as more than just another European transplant in the American market. My father shook his head. "It was derivative of what Galliano was doing that season. I've never been fully satisfied with it." He instead held up sketches for a less celebrated collection. The 1999 Urban Nomad pieces. These were truly innovative in how they approached movement and utility without sacrificing elegance. "But they didn't sell well," my mother countered. "We had to discount the entire line by the end of the season." "Because they were ahead of their time," Olivia interjected. "Looking back, they predicted the athleisure crossover trend by nearly a decade. The market wasn't ready, but the vision was sound." I studied both designs, seeing merit in each perspective. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" I suggested. "Rather than debating which piece was most successful by any single metric, what if we consider which elements from each era best represent the Laurent ethos that continues today?" This reframing shifted our approach entirely. Instead of selecting whole garments, we began identifying signature elements. My father's distinctive seaming techniques, the balanced asymmetry that had become a Laurent hallmark, the unexpected fabric combinations that created visual and tactile complexity. Over the next week, a new kind of collaboration emerged. My mother's analytical approach provided structure, my father's creative intuition offered direction, Olivia's understanding of brand perception added context, and my sustainable material expertise provided the technical foundation for reimagining these elements. The most unexpected development was my mother's gradual shift from skeptical overseer to engaged participant. During one late-night session, as we struggled with how to recreate the weight and drape of a 2005 evening coat without using the original's resource-intensive materials, she disappeared into the archive and returned with samples I'd never seen before. "These were from an experimental collection that never made it to production," she explained, spreading swatches of unusually textured fabrics across the work table. "The bonding technique was too costly at scale then, but with your new cellulose-based adhesive, we might be able to achieve something similar more efficiently." I looked up in surprise. "You've been following our material development that closely." A hint of color touched her cheeks. "I read the reports from your division. It's my job to understand all aspects of the company." My father smiled knowingly across the table. "Your mother has always had an exceptional eye for innovation. She just expresses it differently than we do." This revelation, that my mother had been silently observing and absorbing my work rather than dismissing it, shifted something fundamental in our relationship. I began to see her not as an obstacle to progress, but as someone whose caution stemmed from deep investment in the company's longevity. Her questions became opportunities to articulate my vision more clearly, rather than attacks to defend against. As the collection took shape, so too did a new family dynamic. My father and I still shared that intuitive creative connection, but now my mother's strategic insights and Olivia's understanding of presentation created a more balanced collaborative process. We weren't simply designing garments. We were reconstructing our relationships through the language we all understood, fashion. 6 weeks before the Copenhagen summit, we conducted our first full review of the reimagined pieces. The studio had been cleared of all other projects, with the 5 garments displayed on forms arranged chronologically. We circled them in silence, each absorbing the visual narrative they created together. The 1990s power suit had been reconstructed using regenerative wool with biodegradable interfacing, maintaining its strong shoulders and confident silhouette while reducing its environmental footprint by nearly 80%. The early 2000s cocktail dress retained its celebratory spirit but now featured deadstock sequins arranged in a new pattern that told the story of textile waste through beauty rather than statistics. The 2010s red carpet gown had been reimagined in piece silk and recycled polyester from ocean plastics, its flowing train embedded with subtle messaging about water conservation. But it was the final piece, the future-focused design, that held us all transfixed. We had decided to create a wedding ensemble, acknowledging how Olivia's wedding had catalyzed our family's transformation. Unlike traditional bridal wear, this design rejected the notion of a single-use garment. Each element could be reconfigured for different occasions after the wedding day, extending its life and deepening its meaning for the wearer. "It's quite something," my mother finally said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Not what I expected when we began this process." "Is that good or bad?" I asked. She met my eyes directly. "It's truthful." "Which is better than either?" Coming from her, this was profound praise. "We still need to finalize the presentation concept," Olivia reminded us, ever focused on how our work would be received. The summit organizers have asked for a brief video to accompany the collection, something that explains the philosophy behind it. "I've been thinking about that," I said. "What if, instead of the usual designer commentary, we create something more personal, each of us speaking to how our individual perspectives contributed to this collaborative vision? A family narrative, rather than just a design statement," my father mused. "It would certainly be unexpected from Laurent Designs." My mother frowned slightly. "The fashion industry isn't particularly interested in family dynamics, Madeline. But they are interested in authentic transformation," I countered. "And that's what this collection represents. Not just materials and techniques, but a fundamental shift in how we approach creation itself, moving from isolated genius to collective wisdom." "I like it," Olivia said decisively. "It humanizes sustainability, which has become so technical that many luxury consumers tune out. This makes it about relationships, to each other, to craft, to the future." My mother didn't appear entirely convinced, but she nodded slowly. "We'll need to be careful about how much personal information we share. Vulnerability has its place, but this is still a professional presentation." "Agreed," I said. "The focus remains on the design philosophy, but we acknowledge the human element that shapes it." As we dispersed to our respective responsibilities, my father to oversee final construction details, my mother to brief the board on our progress, Olivia to coordinate with the summit organizers, I remained in the studio, circling the collection once more. These garments represented far more than fabric and thread. They embodied a journey from conflict to collaboration, from rigid roles to fluid exchange of ideas. The midnight blue dress that had sparked our family's reckoning wasn't physically present, but its influence touched every piece, a reminder that sometimes losing something precious can lead to creating something even more valuable. The Copenhagen Reimagined Fashion Summit arrived with the crisp anticipation of early autumn. The Laurent Designs presentation was scheduled for the second day, in the coveted closing slot that signaled the organizers' high expectations. We arrived as a unified front. My father and mother, Olivia and her husband Camden, myself and the key members of my sustainable luxury team. The summit venue, a renovated industrial space overlooking the harbor, hummed with the energy of innovation. Designers, manufacturers, material scientists, and fashion journalists circulated between presentations that ranged from technical breakdowns of new fiber technologies to philosophical examinations of consumption culture. Backstage, as our collection was prepared for its debut, an unexpected moment of vulnerability emerged. My mother, typically unflappable before major presentations, paced the small preparation area, uncharacteristically fidgeting with her signature pearl bracelet. "Are you all right?" I asked, stepping away from where a technician was doing final sound checks for our video. She glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "I'm concerned about the personal nature of our presentation. It's one thing to discuss design philosophy, another entirely to reveal family conflict to industry peers." I recognized this wasn't merely about professional propriety. It was about pride, about the carefully constructed image she had maintained throughout her career. "We're not exposing our challenges as weakness," I assured her. "We're presenting them as the catalyst for meaningful change, the kind of change the entire industry needs to embrace." She studied me for a long moment. "When did you become so wise about perception management?" "I had an excellent teacher," I replied with a small smile. "One who taught me that how you frame a narrative is as important as the narrative itself." A hint of recognition flickered in her eyes. Her own lessons reflected back at her. She straightened her already impeccable jacket. "Well then, let's make sure our framing is impeccable." The presentation began with our video, each family member speaking candidly but thoughtfully about their relationship to the Laurent legacy and how the collaborative process had challenged their assumptions. My father spoke of the tension between artistic ego and collective creation. My mother addressed the balance between preserving tradition and embracing innovation. Olivia reflected on how brand identity could evolve without losing its essential character. When my segment appeared, I spoke directly to the journey that had begun with a midnight blue prom dress and culminated in a new vision for the family company. True sustainability isn't just about materials or production methods. It's about sustaining relationships, sustaining creativity, sustaining the courage to change course when necessary. The garments we're presenting today aren't perfect, just as our collaborative process wasn't perfect, but they represent an honest attempt to create something that honors the past while taking responsibility for the future. As the video concluded, the 5 reimagined pieces were revealed through a choreographed sequence that emphasized their connection to Laurent Designs' history while highlighting their innovative elements. The audience response was immediate and enthusiastic, not just polite industry applause, but genuine engagement. The Q&A session that followed revealed how deeply our approach had resonated. Questions focused not just on technical details, but on the process of transformation itself, how we had navigated disagreement, integrated diverse perspectives, balanced individual expression with collective vision. "What was the most challenging aspect of this family collaboration?" asked a senior editor from a leading fashion publication. My father looked to me, then to my mother, a silent question passing between us about who should address this potentially sensitive topic. My mother stepped forward, surprising us all. "Learning to listen," she said with uncharacteristic directness. "Truly listen, not just wait for my turn to speak. I've spent decades believing that my role was to protect the Laurent legacy as I understood it. What this project taught me was that legacy isn't static. It evolves through the contributions of each generation, each perspective." She glanced at me briefly before continuing. "My daughter once designed a midnight blue dress with constellations that told her personal story. I failed to recognize its significance beyond its aesthetic value. That failure nearly cost our family and our company something precious, the authentic, creative voice of the next generation." A hushed attention fell over the audience, recognition that we were sharing something genuine rather than a carefully constructed brand narrative. "The most valuable sustainability practice we've implemented," my mother concluded, "isn't a material innovation or production technique. It's creating space for new voices to be heard, especially when they challenge our most fundamental assumptions." As the formal presentation concluded, and attendees moved toward the collection for closer examination, industry leaders approached us with unexpected openness about their own challenges integrating sustainability into heritage brands. What had begun as a showcase of Laurent Designs' innovation had transformed into a catalyst for broader industry conversation about family businesses, generational transition, and authentic transformation. Later that evening, as we gathered for dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the water, a sense of quiet accomplishment settled over our family. The formality that had often characterized our interactions had given way to something more genuine. Not perfect harmony, but honest engagement. To new beginnings, my father proposed, raising his glass. And honored endings, I added, thinking of the midnight blue dress that now hung in my apartment, a reminder of both loss and discovery. My mother reached across the table, briefly touching my hand, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it momentarily startled me. To reclaiming what matters, she said softly, and having the wisdom to recognize it in time. As the Copenhagen lights reflected on the dark water beyond our window, I understood that some journeys come full circle while simultaneously moving forward. The midnight blue dress my father had created for me years ago hadn't just been about fabric and stars. It had been about recognition, seeing me for who I was and who I might become. In losing it and fighting to reclaim its meaning, I had ultimately found something more valuable: the courage to create on my own terms while remaining connected to the legacy that had shaped me. Fashion, at its core, has always been about transformation, turning raw materials into objects of beauty and meaning. But the most profound transformation hadn't been in the sustainable collection we'd created together. It had been in ourselves, a family learning that the strongest designs, like the strongest relationships, must be both resilient and adaptable, honoring tradition while embracing change. As we raised our glasses in the gentle Nordic twilight, I knew that whatever challenges awaited us, in business, in creativity, in our evolving family dynamic, we now possessed something essential: the understanding that what truly matters can never be stolen or diminished, only temporarily forgotten until someone has the courage to reclaim it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.